Welcome back to Inside Personal Growth. This is Greg Voice and the host of Inside Personal Growth. And I have a friend joining me from Costa Mesa, California. I've known Dr. Stephen Bizal for probably 15 plus years at this point.
Yeah.
And we've been friends for a long time. And his message is great. He's been on the show before, but it's been a long time. But today, what we're going to be doing is speaking about his new book, The Optimal Life. It's Empowering Health, Healing, and Longevity, updated and revised edition that just came out on Amazon. Really great buy. I'm going to encourage all my listeners. The Kindle price is $9.99, and you can go up there and buy the print version as well. But Steve, I'm going to let the listeners know a little bit about you, because even though you and I know each other real well, the listeners don't know much about you. So he's the author of this book, which is critically acclaimed, and that's why the second edition and version. He's an innovator in the field of human potential and human performance. He founded the first executive health and fitness coaching company, Personalized Health and Fitness, in Southern California. And in 1981, after helping a friend who weighed 365 lose 100 pounds, The Optimal Life, empowerment program, wellness, lifestyle, medicine, healthy aging, was the first wellness course approved by the continuing education in California for both medical and chiropractic professionals. His book, The Optimal Life, which again, we're going to be talking about the new revised version, was also an online course at PsychEd, approved for CE credits for psychologists, LMFTs, and RNs and social workers in California, Texas, Ohio, and Florida. He's very thought-provoking. He's known as America's wellness go-to guy, and he really does take this and help you connect the dots. Well, Steve, welcome back to Inside Personal Growth. It's been a long time since we've had you on, and this new revised edition, as I was doing the review, I will say, is really great. People ought to go pick this up. And, you know, you have been an advocate. You and I meet for lunches. We go out, we've done a lot of things of healing from a noetic medicine approach. So that, to me, that's the mind, body, spirit approach since you started your practice. And that goes back many, many years. How would you define the whole body approach to healing? And how does this differ from traditional healing modalities that we see? We see functional medicine doctors. We see all kinds of people approaching, trying to help people heal issues, which can be deep-seated from long emotional things. How would you approach it?
Well, Greg, why don't we do this? Let's frame this concept of what you've identified as traditional. If you're talking about traditional as the medical paradigm and the medical paradigm of healthcare delivery, then there are doctors that just deal with the physical aspect of your body. That's one dimension, but they only look at it through that perspective. There are doctors that deal with your mental health, psychiatrists and psychologists, and they only look at the mental piece of it. There are psychologists that work with people on an emotional level, and other folks that work on an emotional level as well. But they only address the emotional, and they address each one of these specializations only addresses it in the context of their specialty, and doesn't necessarily look at it in what I call the context of the whole enchilada. And that is if you can embrace the concept that we're comprised of spiritual energy, emotional energy, the energy of thought, as well as the physical, and they're all interrelated and they all influence each other, then any path you go down to try to improve the quality of your life, the quality of your health, or the quality of your relationships that don't embrace an understanding of this interrelationship, then what you have is a self-limiting paradigm. And that self-limiting paradigm will fail you at some point along the way, no matter how much energy you put into it. It's like you're still missing pieces of the puzzle unless you're looking at all those different dimensions of your life simultaneously.
Well, we're very complex, physical, emotional, spiritual, and mental spirits that walk the planet, and the most important thing is it's a holistic approach.
Right.
Noetic medicine is a holistic approach. You're not just, in your case, okay, having someone come in as you used to do. You don't do this anymore, but in chiropractic, okay, find this pain, crack their back. You're
Right.
looking for the issues that actually created that. What are the emotional things that may have caused somebody to have these things go wrong with them? And you state that when you speak about spirit, that you're referring to the essence of the individual at an energy level. How much of a factor is our spiritual health in curing illness that we might be dealing with, in your estimation?
Well, I think that's the hub of the wheel. That's the center of the focal point that most people are not even aware of, Greg. And probably a way to put that into context, let me put it that way, is that the healthcare delivery model in the United States and what people know about healthcare from the medical paradigm. Remember, the medical paradigm is based upon what we call it's Newtonian physics, which is dealing with just the material plane, the physical aspect of your life. When you're talking noetic, when you're talking spirituality, when you're talking emotional, when you're talking mental thoughts, remember, those are all energetic frames of references based upon a quantum model. The quantum mechanics, quantum physics basically puts everything in the realm of everything in the universe is based upon energy and the flow of energy. So at one level, you could define health as being the unrestricted flow of the natural energy through all those systems in your body. And what the disease process is when there are impediments to that natural flow. And that's natural flow. It's not just in the physical, in the circulation of your blood or your lymphatic or your nerve flow going on in the body. It has to do with the emotional energy matrix that the whole body is in. It has to do with the mental thoughts that you think that basically also influence your emotions and also influence the physical. And at the very core of that is, if it is true that we are energy creatures, I talk about spirituality and the energy of love, and the energy of love being the most important energy and the most powerful energy in the universe, more powerful than any other energy. If all 50 to 100 trillion cells in your body are operating in an energy matrix that's defined by love, what that would imply is that every cell in your body then has its potential to reach its optimal potential to do whatever it is from a physiology standpoint at a physical level that it needs to do. Likewise, if the energy matrix within which all 50 to 100 trillion cells in your body are operating, and that energy matrix looks like anger, fear, guilt, shame, those are all energy levels that are very, very restrictive and restrict every cell in your body from being able to reach its highest potential, which sets you up for all kinds of different disease processes.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, the vibratory levels at which we attune, and I think you quoted him in your book. I'm trying to remember Hawking, Stephen Hawking, right?
David Hawkins.
David Hawking, sorry,
Yeah.
David Hawking. I went to a conference and he would say, the Dalai Lama vibrates at 5,000 and the average
Right.
person kind of vibrates at be lucky 700. Right. So, there was just such a huge difference. And I remember distinctly that. And you speak about the rules of health in your book. Can you speak with the listeners about the universal principle rules and how these rules affect our whole being?
Let me do this, Greg, because you brought it up there, but let me define. I believe that there are two pieces of the puzzle that people need to be able to embrace and wrap their head around to be able to optimize their human potential this time around on planet Earth. One of them is we touch on a little bit, and that is the health model that you're familiar with that I use to represent this concept of mind, body, spirit, and emotion. Is one half of the equation. And my physical representation of that and people will find that in the book, is that concept of what I did was I took a target that has a bullseye.
Yeah, I have a
and
questioner coming up about that.
Oh, you were? Okay.
I do. Yeah. I meant to say you got all the questions, so I was curious if you looked at them. But the point is that we know it emanates from the heart and then goes out from there in a circle. Right?
Energy. Well, the energy thing that you were talking about is if the relationship that I use here. Have you ever taken a pebble and thrown it into a pool of still water?
Right.
What do you get? You get ripples.
Mm-hmm.
Which way do the ripples go?
Out.
From the center. Do you ever throw a stone at one point and then the ripples start from the outside?
No.
There's an example of universal principle that holds true all the time. And what do the ripples actually represent? The ripples actually represent the transfer of energy through the entire system.
Mm-hmm.
So it starts with the essence of energy and the energy of love, that then it emanates outward and influences your thoughts, influences your emotions, and influences that physical dimension in your body. So if that's half the equation, then we could describe health as being the natural consequence of the expression of spiritual energy, emotional energy, the energy of thought being manifested in the physical plane.
Right.
So that's half of the understanding. Now, to address specifically what you brought up, the other way, when I was playing doctor, I would work with folks. They would come in to see me, and if you had a headache or a neck pain or a back pain, I can tell you when I did a workup on you as a patient, that wasn't the only problem that you had. There were always other issues. And based upon my understanding of these other issues, I would ask you, I said, Greg, if you came in to see me for a neck problem and you had other issues, I go, are you aware of how you are contributing to the creation of these other problems in your life? And I usually get the deer in headlamp response. And what I couldn't understand was, why couldn't people see that there were other dimensions of their life that were contributing to their problem that they were only addressing at one level?
It's primarily because they haven't connected the dots.
Correct.
I'm saying I'm not saying everybody that listens to the show or anybody. They're pretty consciously aware people. They may have already connected those dots and understand that, a pain here can be associated with an emotional issue here. And unless I clean up that emotional issue, and that could be from many years of trauma, call it the trauma of, a father berating a son at a certain point, or a daughter.
Psychological, emotional.
Exactly. Sure. And people don't really normally think about that because it happens in a moment, it passes. They don't think that there is that much of an impact, but there really is an impact because over time you've buried that feeling because you haven't worked through it, as you know. And you state that humans suffer with health problems, not because we can't resolve our health problems, but because we cannot see the truth about our health problems. Speak with our listeners about obtaining optimal health and how they can find the truth. I mean, if this truly is an emotional issue that caused the back pain or the neck pain or the shoulder pain or whatever it is, how do I find the truth in that?
Well, you have to understand every game has rules. And if you don't understand the rules of the game that you're playing, you don't even stand a chance to win. Mm-hmm. So the universal principles that you're making reference to, the universal principles are the rules of the game of this is how you live life on planet Earth to optimize your potential. And there are two aspects of those universal principles. There's spiritual laws and laws of nature. And just in the one way I could use that health model to define what happens in your physical body as a natural consequence of what's happening at those other energetic levels. The other way that I learned to look at this that made more sense to some people was I could define health as the natural consequence of you being in alignment with spiritual laws and laws of nature. So if that's how you define health, what is the disease process looking at it through that lens? The disease process happens when you're either violating spiritual laws or laws of nature, and you're not even aware of it. So the
Correct.
healing process then is what? The healing process, very simply stated in that way, is identifying where you may be out of alignment with spiritual laws, laws of attraction, laws of abundance, laws of karma, and laws of nature, correcting those. So the healing process is really just getting back in alignment with spiritual laws and laws of nature. So it's you brought up the term
10 laws in the book.
Well, and it's all about, so what's connecting the dots? Connecting the dots is you cannot change anything in your life unless you are aware of what's going on in the game you're in.
Right.
And based upon the way we've been raised and the environment from an educational standpoint, whether it's from an educational standpoint, whether it's the religious values, whether it's political, for example, the book that you held up there, if you had that book when you came out of the womb, and it lists the 10 principles of wellness and goes into deeper detail, explaining at a deeper level, but at a layman's standpoint, what all this means, we would have all stood a better chance of creating a healthier, happier life.
Yeah, I mean, I think the probability is greater. I think that this is a process, though, and it requires a lot of diligence on all levels.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about how we think, how we behave, how we form habits, how psychologically we react or we act. We're talking about food consumption, exercise. All of these things play roles into the cell's health in the body. And you speak about the phases of the disease process, right? We say dis-ease process.
Right.
What are they, and why is detoxification one of the cures for these degenerative diseases? Because, all right, I get it. There's a lot of detox diets out there, but I don't think you're just talking about detox, meaning let's go on a fast. That's not the Dr. Stephen Bizal way. You're talking about detox in a very, very large universal picture here. So speak with the listeners about that, if you would.
Well, Greg, that's a great question, because you're absolutely right. The detox I'm talking about is the detoxing of the negative thoughts you have in the gray matter between your ears.
Right.
It's also talking about detoxing from the unresolved emotional business from the past that's never been addressed, that sits in your subconscious mind. Most people believe that the decisions that they make, remember, we are the sum accumulation of all of our words, all of our thoughts, all of our actions to get us where we are now. So everything that we do in our life contributes to the outcome of what we're experiencing in some way. And, when we talk about awareness, that just sounds like an intellectual pursuit. And I get it. All right. And like yourself, I've been a constant learner, but it wasn't until I was struggling to the point where I hit the wall and I asked myself, dude, why is your life not working out here? Why are you not happy? Why are you not feeling connected with people? That it wasn't until I hit the wall and didn't know what else to do that I started asking, okay, if it is true that I'm contributing to the creation of everything that isn't working in my life, what is it that I need to know and understand to be able even to start to address any and all of these issues? So and I think it's by nature of being born human, is that sometimes we have to hit that depth of the low points in our life before we're willing to really take a look and go, okay, what's going on here? I'm tired of suffering.
So in your case, what did you need to understand that you think is relatively universal? So behind all this, right, someone identifies a problem. The problem manifests in some way within the body.
Well, not, let me stop you, Greg, not just in the body. If you're struggling in any aspect of your life, if you're struggling in relationships,
Yeah, emotionally, mentally,
mentally, right,
spiritually.
right.
So what is it that, if a listener out there right now is listening to you, they're going to go get your book, all right? And they're going to want to learn about this. If you had your own struggles, which every human person, the Buddha said, there's suffering and then there's the end of suffering.
Right.
So but the end of suffering has to come by an awareness. What awareness did you have?
There were, when I first hit the wall and realized that I was struggling and my life wasn't working, I had a couple of realizations. And when I was able to embrace these couple of realizations, then at least gave me a frame of reference of giving me some direction on knowing where to go. The very first one was that, let me see, there were several of them, but I think the most important realization was the realization that everything that I was experiencing in my life, I was contributing to the creation of in some way. Now think about how powerful that is, because if that is true,
So you're
inherent,
saying you didn't blame anyone else. You took full responsibility. That was your realization. A lot of
the
people, Steve, as you know, they'll say they did it to me, or it happened out there. It was somebody else that did it. We know one of the first principles of universal law is taking 100% responsibility for all your own actions, right?
well, and that's and how I define it is that was the second realization, was that the for me to be able to, if I fully wanted to be in charge of my life and not be a victim to anything else that was going on, and I really bought into that concept of everything that I do contributes to my outcome, and I'm willing to do exactly what you said, and that is accept. And I even, when I defined this for myself, I didn't give myself any wiggle room. Okay, when I decided to commit myself to this path, and when I say no wiggle room, the very next thing I realized was, okay, if I was going to take this journey, take this path, I needed to commit to being 100% not just responsible, but accountable for what? For all of my feelings, all of my thoughts, all of my words, and all of my actions. There's no wiggle room there.
Right.
All
Exactly.
right. And if I was willing to commit to that, I believed in my heart of hearts, because I didn't know what the journey was going to look like. People talk to me all the time about, okay, what does that look like? What course do I need to take to change my life? Blah, 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 blah. No, you need to have that internal conversation with yourself. You need to have what I call that come to Jesus meeting about what is and what is not working in your life. And then you have to ask yourself one question. If it ain't working and you're not quite sure what to do, are you willing to do what you have to do in order to get what you want? And in this case, change your life.
Mm-hmm.
So the
Right.
third part on that was to be open-minded to the fact that there are things that you're not aware of that you need to know and you need to understand. And one of those things is that we're holistic in nature.
Right.
There's an emotional piece, there's a mental piece. I'm like, so, okay, so if there's all these four pieces here, even though my relationship isn't working, what are these other parts? How do they play out in my mind, emotionally, in the body? Because
Right.
if I'm aware of what they are, at least I have a direction of knowing what type of research that I need to do from a learning standpoint to become aware so that I can change, because you can't change anything without awareness.
Well,
And
you do a really good job in the book of outlining 10 principles of wellness. The 10 principles of wellness. If you would, for the listeners, I don't know, I'm sure I would think you would remember them, but what are they? How easy is it for our listeners to transmute bad habits and insert your healthy living principles into their lives? Because they're in here. Okay. I
yeah,
did
well,
my homework prior to coming on the air here. And I think even if you just mentioned them, the 10 principles, people would get a lot out of it.
Well, and again, this is based upon my life's experiences of my own healing journey, and then having played doctor for a bunch of years. And that was just about trying to help people figure it out for themselves. So that's why I use the term that you use. What the book is really all about is connecting the dots. And I think what I saw was people in their heart of hearts were expending a lot of energy, all right, trying to change things in their life. And I saw that they just had pieces of the puzzle that were missing. Right. That was all it was. So I went, okay, because I never sat down to write a book, to be an author. I didn't get started that way. What I found is when I was playing doctor, just trying to help people from an educational standpoint, based upon what I was learning, I coalesced and started putting all this stuff together over time based upon my healing journey and people's struggles, and identified what I call the dots. And I chose the 10 principles of wellness because I just considered them like the 10 commandments.
Right.
And so based upon the health model and what we talked about previously, I said, okay, what does it take? What does it take to get to be healthy in every aspect of your life?
Right.
And I said, so very simply, and this ties back to the health model, number one is you need healthy spiritual energy. Number two, you need healthy emotions. And let me just tag on something. Every disease process, what I learned over time is every disease process has its origin in unresolved emotional pain in a person's life.
Yep.
Now, at another time, we can go deeper into that one. I mean, there's a whole conversation around the emotional healing piece that I address in my globalmedicineman.wordpress.com blog that people are willing to go to, and it's a 3-part series. The third then is having accurate thoughts and belief system. Is your belief systems and thoughts about how the world works and how you work in the world, is it accurate or inaccurate? Because if it's inaccurate and you're making your decisions around inaccuracy, how in the hell would you ever expect to get an optimal outcome?
Right.
So, those, and I put them in order of priority, those first 3. And then after that, what is the most important? Then we get to the physical. So we talked about the spiritual, we talked about the emotional, we talked about the accurate belief systems, and then we get into the physical. And what's the most important nutrient for the human body? Now, before you answer that, because you already know the answer, this book was a course that I taught continuing education in the state of California, teaching doctors the wellness health model, the wellness paradigm that we're discussing. I would ask this question of whether they were chiropractors or medical doctors in the room, what's the most important nutrient for the human body? I would start with a quiz. Very seldom did they get it right. The most important nutrient for the human body is oxygen.
Yep.
And if the most important nutrient for the human body is oxygen, then what's the most important exercise?
Anything that would move your heart.
Breathing. Now think about this, how the breathing, and if you look at what's the core issue around yoga and meditation? Breathing. It's how you're breathing while you're going through each one of these things. So you see, there's all kinds of levels to connect the dots here that I present simplistically. All right, then if the most important nutrient of the body is oxygen, what is the next most important nutrient of the body? Water. It's water, right? Hydration. All right. So then from there, there's the hormone balance is one of them. Keeping the body alkaline, which is very important in the context of all the processed foods that people are eating in this day and age, which that on top with, in addition to the medications, is making everybody's internal biological environment acidic, which then is the basis for a lot of the physical disease processes that are compounded by emotional issues, psychological issues. So it's all related, and all I try to do is break that all out. Well, so as we move into those, you do a great job of it in the book, and I think there's charts, there's graphs, there's questions. So for my listeners, at the end of each one of these chapters, he has
questions for you to ponder and write about, think about. You speak about unhealthy emotions. We've talked about this now for the last 25 minutes and
Right.
how these emotions play this big role in our health. But there's two things we haven't talked about.
Okay.
One is the role of our conscious mind and our subconscious mind. If you would talk about the roles they play and what are the 10 healing principles that you talk about in the book? You got through 5 of them so far.
Yeah, well, there's the food you eat, there's exercise, the other ones as well. But the
but
let me add
speak
to
in
one of the things.
particular about, if you would, because you've talked about, okay, we've got to change the way we think. We've got to change our beliefs. But the subconscious mind plays such an important role in all of this. We haven't really addressed how to reprogram that subconscious mind. And I know you have some ideas on that.
I have some thoughts. Oh my, what a surprise. No, what most people don't realize is most people think that they're making the decisions in their life, that the decisions that they're making at a conscious level based upon having awareness and consciousness of what they are making decisions about. What most people would be surprised to find out is that what influences 90% of your decision making and the decisions that you make don't happen at a conscious level. It comes
Right.
from the programming that has happened over time at a subconscious level.
Right.
That if we want to take it all the way back, and your subconscious, it's all in that emotional frame of reference. Here's what people don't realize. From the moment of conception, Greg, and you and me, for the first 9 months of gestation, while we were in our mother's womb, we were under the influence of our mother's emotional matrix energy.
Mm-hmm.
So that means for the entire 9 months, as the fetus was evolving and growing, every cell in your body was exposed to all the feelings that your mother was going through, all the joy, all the happiness, but then again, all the sadness, all the pain, all the anger, all the frustration. So by the time that you come out of the womb, guess what? You already have emotional cellular memory ingrained in every cell in that little baby body.
Mm-hmm.
Now, anybody that has children, you remember when your babies were little, they only experienced the world at a, quote, feeling level. And the world either felt good or it didn't. And based upon a lot of the negative conditioning that happens over time, what happens at a subconscious level, we start to create filters that when in the alpha state, that by the time the beta brain starts to kick in 4, 5, 6, 7 years later as a child, you're already looking at the world through whatever filters were created at an emotional level.
Yeah.
And most of them aren't the happy ones. Most of them are the negative and the traumatic ones that happen at an emotional level based upon the behaviors, the natural behaviors that you created as a child to survive in an emotional environment, not having what you and I have now as adults, the wherewithal to interpret correctly what was going on at the time. Here, let me give you an example, okay? An example of this is you're 3 years old, you're playing with a ball out in the front yard, the ball starts to roll out into the street. Mom's watching this, she freaks out and she screams, "Greg, get away! Don't run out into the street. Don't chase the ball." Okay. Now, at 3 years old, Greg, you or I probably didn't go, "Wow, look at that. Mom's freaking out. I know this is all about her. Okay, I won't go out in the street." No, what happens is it puts you and me at 3 years old, our emotional body, it puts us into a state of shock. And the message that it sends us when we get too many of those is there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with me. I can't figure out why. My relationships don't work. I'm not happy. You see what I mean? So and that's an oversimplified version, but and you probably read from a psychology standpoint how many negative life's experiences you have by the time you're 5 years old. It's compared to the positive ones.
Well, I think you talked a little bit about quantum physics, and I'm going to relate back to something that I recently heard. Talk about the cosmic dream and our dreaming. In the two states of which we exist, that being what we think is this real world here right now, right? You and I are on a podcast.
Right.
We say this is the real world. And really, so what is the difference between that state of consciousness and the consciousness in which you had some dreams that you remembered, didn't remember? You were just basically, they're the same. And what I'm saying is, for people like you just said about mom yelling at me going out to the ball to get it in the street, right? How about one where in a dream a monster is chasing you and you're like, it just keeps coming after you, and finally you hit this dead end, the monster's there, and you're saying, what do you want? And the monster then says, what do you want? Right? What I'm saying? It's like, that is the kind of message you're receiving at night when you're dreaming. But in your daytime, what you think is reality, there isn't any separation. The only thing is the detachment to what you really believe is real or not real. So with that being said, you speak about so much in this book, but changing inaccurate and limiting belief systems is one of the things you talk about. Can you help the listeners identify and transmute? What would you do to help them transmute limiting beliefs? Because that's where those limiting beliefs start from.
That's you're right. That's where they start from.
Yeah.
All right. Well, the first thing you'd have to come to grips with is that, believe it or not, we're all starting from a point of a limiting belief system, because when we had these experiences when we were younger, and they're all emotional, we created thought patterns based upon inaccurate perceptions. See, at 3 years old, we had an inaccurate perception. That inaccurate perception that developed over time was, there's something wrong with me. The accurate perception was, oh, listen, there's nothing wrong with me. That was just mom freaking out. I get that. Now, if you had the ability to do that at 3 years old, you would be owning your power. See, most people don't realize that because of all the emotional trauma, whatever the degree was, the psychological trauma, no matter what the degree is, from the small to the large, inadvertently, what happened to us is, because when we were little, we were victims. We were victims in the true sense of the word, because we didn't have the power. We didn't realize we had the power that was greater than things that were happening around us. So that first level of realization is that what you would find is, no matter what your struggle is, what it looks like, part of the key to turning any kind of struggle situation around and not suffer is to realize that you have more power to determine the outcomes in your life than you're realizing at that present moment. And that, in essence, the term that they use is that you didn't realize it, but we all gave up our power to different paradigms when we were younger. It was to what mom and dad were saying. It was what the teachers were telling us in school. It was what the religions were telling us. It was what we heard about the politics. See, we weren't free thinkers coming from a place of knowing that we had the power to be able to interpret things accurately. So we start at the end of being ignorant. We start being ignorant and having given up our power. And the game is to realize that you do have the power to change. But for you to take back your power, you have to do what you brought up originally. You have to accept 100% accountability and responsibility for all your thoughts, your words, and your actions. And
well,
part
and
of that responsibility.
One of those things that I'm certain it's addressed, but I'll just say for the listeners, they've heard this a lot of times. The negative self-talk, which then programs every element of everything,
right?
It starts to permeate And then the words that you speak to yourself and others, it's like other people will say, wow, dude, why are you talking like that? Right. It's like you have to wake up to the fact of how you're programming this subconscious.
Awareness. That's
And that's
self-awareness.
right, the self-awareness of that. And I think if there's two things you could take away from this show is one, what is the negative self-talk and what are those limiting beliefs, right?
Well, and most people are they're in denial many times that they're even having negative thoughts or negative self-talk. They're so conditioned, and it becomes so remote, or so what's the word I'm looking for here? Automatic, that they don't even realize they're doing it again and again and again and again. And this is like working out. You get your muscles strong. Well, if you're doing negative self-talk, you're getting your negative self-talk muscles strong. And then it's harder to break out of that. And that's why open-mindedness is such a critical issue here.
Totally.
And being open-minded, and no matter, it's okay to feel whatever you're feeling. I would never want somebody to deny that. But because we have a brain that allows us to think, you can look at that and realize that, well, maybe that's not accurate. If you just question anything that you're struggling with, you might find there's another way to look at it that isn't a negative self-talk.
Well, it is your perception of your own reality. And that's how you shift that perception, is by asking those questions. And you have lots of those questions in the book. I mean, it's loaded with questions at the end of the chapters. So,
well, each chapter, Greg, each chapter, if I may, for your audience, even if you don't want to read the whole book, because I know it's kind of like 360 pages of factual information, this, that, and the other thing. But what you brought up is there are 13 chapters. At the end of each chapter, there are 10 what I call must knows, which is the summary of the highlights of that chapter.
Yeah.
And then based on that, then there are 10 what I call must do's, which would be the implementations that you can do to address that aspect of your life in each one of those 10 wellness principles.
And they're very clear at the end of each one of these chapters, by the way. So for those of you, you will go to Amazon and you'll get this book. Now, to wrap up our interview, Steve.
Okay.
The book's filled with wisdom. It's filled with great advice. It focuses on things we need to do to become aware of how to become more holistic in the way in which we live. What 3 things can you leave the listeners with right now that can change their life today and make them healthier emotionally, physically, psychologically, spiritually? What are 3 things that they could apply, like right now? They walk away from this podcast and go, man, that was a great podcast, because that dude, that Dr. Stephen Bizal, gave me 3 things that I could work on.
All right. Can I give you 4?
You can give me 4.
One of them is going to be Steve Bizal, and then 3 of them is Steve Bizal's version of something that David Hawkins said that I absolutely loved. All right. The Steve Bizal one, and I found the most powerful tool that I could use for myself to change my life, was every morning before I got out of bed, as soon as I opened my mind, I set the intentions of what I wanted to create for the day, which allows you to live in the present moment and then apply what your intentions are throughout the day. That's how you create the ultimate change. And here's an example. Okay, what does that look like? For me, it was, when I wake up first thing in the morning, the intention I create is, or that I establish is, I want to be as loving, as kind, as considerate, as compassionate, as understanding, as patient, as tolerant as I can possibly be with all people at all times in every situation I run into today. Can I be a better version of myself today than I was yesterday? Just as a human being, you'd be amazed at 2 things. Number one, 99% of the population never sets an intention when they get out of bed. And you know the power of the mind. So if you did that, that's your Steve Bizalism.
I'll add one. I'll
Okay.
add to this list
Okay.
before I pop out of bed. And the fact that you woke up, give gratitude for, look at, you have your sight, you have your ability to walk, you have your ability to just get up and get around and do things and be constructive. And I always, every morning, thank God for all that I have been given. And I'd say, so if you're going to set intentions, set those intentions with gratitude.
You get an A+, dude. Well, what's interesting is I appreciate you having me on the podcast. I still haven't forgotten about the 3, but you and I could take this and expand this into a 1-week workshop. Because I know your background, dude.
So what are
the
2
3
more? Yeah.
Okay, the three that David Hawkins, all right, and then Steve Bizal isn't all right.
Okay.
The Hawkins said something very profound. He said, you don't need a guru in your life. You don't need to find a guru. He goes, the road to enlightenment, there's only 3 things that you need to do. Number 1 is you need to be kind at all that exists. What I added to that was beginning with you. Number 2 was you need to be able to see the beauty in all things. What Steve Bizal added was beginning with you. And the 3rd was embrace humility and be willing to forgive.
Beginning with you.
Beginning with you.
I like that. Those are great things that anybody can do.
Anybody can do, right?
Easy to adopt, easy to remember. Look, the first thing you said is
powerful. Set
intentions. Gratitude, I added with gratitude.
Okay, so it's a Greg Voice and Steve Bizal one.
Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
All right.
Now there's 4. There's 4. And then the ones that you just gave. But I think what's really important here is that the people should go out to books.drbizal.com and get a copy of the book, either the Kindle version or the paperback. It isn't that thick. And the type is big enough. Look, folks, you can read this pretty quick. This isn't that difficult. It's really, really a great book. And it addresses every level of where you are in your life. In other words, if you're a beginner, this is a great book. If you're somebody who's had advanced training and all these things we've been talking about, this is a great book because it's a reminder. Because it's one thing to talk about this. It's another thing to actually take action on it. And Steve, I want to thank you for being on Inside Personal Growth and sharing. Again, go to books.drbizal.com to learn more. Pick up a copy of the book. Namaste to you.
Thanks, Greg, with gratitude.
Everything. Yep, with gratitude and intention at the highest level.
And bless everyone.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Greg.